Testing, testing. Sorry to interrupt. But perfect. Okay, well, we're going to get started because I know we've got a couple great looking guys in here, and we've got some people on, yes, and gal. And we've got some people in Hinckley, too. So we'll get the webcast started on time. Thank you for being here, everybody. I'm going to try to keep my normally very loud voice somewhat moderated so next door doesn't have to try to talk over me and then I talk over them. But regardless, thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to talk about taking control of your cash or eliminating debt, as well as just general, I think, best practices for saving and retirement and what to think about. A little bit about me. My name is Anthony Gerbi. I'm a financial advisor with Stein Financial Group. I'm coming to you today from SOFA, which is the Society for Financial Awareness, and this is educational. So I don't have my advisor hat on today, and there will be plenty of time for questions. You may have a question about, well, what would you do in this situation, A or B? And in my normal day job, I'd flat out tell you, well, my advice is this. Today I'm going to tell you, well, here's how I'd think about that question, and these are the pros and cons to each one, more of an educational vibe. But I am originally from Little Falls, Minnesota, which is just west of here. And actually, for the folks in Hinckley, I lived in Hinckley for a year, a couple years ago. My wife used to be the band teacher in town. So that may either raise your opinion or lower your opinion of me, depending on whether your kids like band or not. But anyway, I now work for Stein Financial Group, and I'm a member of SOFA as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. But before I get into actually just reading slides, and this is a little bit about SOFA, we're not a for-profit business. This is purely educational. That goes back to what I was saying, a little bit more about them. You've got sort of the evaluation forms that were handed out at the beginning and a note form. That is going to be a really key piece of information because I may say something that will spur a thought that you have. And you may even want to follow up with me, which is great. My contact info, I'll make sure to leave it with Tasha as well. And if you email her or Joanne or Devana, who was here this morning, any one of them, they will be able to help point you toward me if you have an individual question for me. But today, I want to talk about some of the best practices to make a successful working life transition to retirement. And maybe the number one thing that I could talk about today is, I told this story to the first group too. So my wife and I were married a little over a year ago now. And so the couple years before that was when I first met her family, and you're doing all the introductions that you normally do, and they say, well, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I'm a financial advisor. And of course, it's just a blank look at that point, and because what does that really mean at this point? And I used to say I help people make good decisions with their money, usually with money, but actually just good decisions in general. Today, or now, I say I help people not make bad decisions. And I think that is the number one piece of advice. Easier said than done, I know. But the number one thing you can do to retire well, to save well, to live well, is avoid some of those unforced errors that people make. What are some of those? Well, we're going to talk about credit card debt. That can be an unforced error. Sometimes it's a forced error, too, depending on what happens with life. Not saving enough, not committing to saving to your retirement plan, or even if you don't have access to a retirement plan, like you worked part-time or you maybe just started here because they have benefits here, but maybe you didn't before, there are other ways to save too. A third one would be either being a role model for other people or finding one if you need one yourself. We could fill this entire room up with everybody who works for Grand Casino, and I could say the exact same things, and for some people, it would click, and for some people, it would be in one ear and out the other. And the unfortunate truth is, having somebody come from the outside like me and saying this only goes so far with some people. They need somebody inside the group who they know and trust to say, hey, this is important, get started saving. Take your 401k seriously. Even if you're not a budget person, take your monthly cash flow seriously, because that's what sets you up for success in the long run. I mean, money can't buy happiness. That's self-evident. But what I've found in my day-to-day practice and my day-to-day life with the clients I work with is being free to do what you want, especially in retirement, now and in retirement, but especially in retirement, is the key to whether you're happy in retirement or not. So money gets you to that point. It doesn't buy the happiness, but it gets you to where you want to go. I think everybody has an intuitive understanding of wants versus needs. And what I'm highlighting here specifically is actually not the needs part. The needs are taken for granted. You have to have your needs. That's by definition. You need shelter, you need food, you need transportation, you need probably a good TV connection on Sundays or whatever's important to you. Then there's the wants. I want to spend more time with the kids and grandkids. I want to travel in retirement. I want this, I want that. That is where taking control of your finances, the money aspect, that's where it gets you. Again, this might be self-evident. I'm going to get a lot more detailed in a second, but when you cover something as broad as taking control of your finances, we got to start from the building blocks here. So with that, we buy because of emotion. I'm not just going to read every slide here. One thing I'll talk about here, I have seen, and I work with many people on the entire spectrum of wealth, people who are living more or less off their Social Security, and maybe they saved a little bit while they were working, and people who have Social Security pensions and generous retirement accounts. The correlation of happiness to amount of money is not just an upward diagonal line, meaning the more money you have, the happier you are. I have just as many happy people in the lower end of the income spectrum than the upper end. It's about what you're able to do with the money. Think about your retirement, not in terms of, I need to have X amount, thousands of dollars by the time I walk away because I've got to pay for the rest of my life. And by the way, if anyone here or on the Hinckley call is married, and I say married because I know the statistic by heart for married couples, if you and your partner live till 65, if you're both around at 65, there's a 50-50 shot one of you is going to make it to 90. Actually better than 50-50. So a lot of people come into my office and they say, hey, it's great, Anthony, you did this whole financial plan for me. You said I was going to live till 94. Okay, let's bump that down to 79 if I'm lucky here. And I'll say, well, we can do that. That's fine. And all the numbers are going to work better if your life is shorter. But I would plan for a long retirement if I were you. Healthcare is better than ever these days. Of course, you know your family history better than I do. You know what to expect because you've maybe dealt with a parent or a loved one. But plan for a long retirement. I'm telling you that right now. That means we got to save now. But it also means we got to think about what that's going to look like. Are you going to be a person who's comfortable sitting home and just twiddling your thumbs and watching TV? Maybe you are. A lot of people are. A lot of people work that last day and they say, you know what, Anthony, every day is Saturday. And I'm just at home doing whatever I want every day. I'm like, great, that sounds awesome if that's for you. Some people can do that for a month and then they start volunteering somewhere. Or we used to have a Walmart greeter who was one of our clients, and he had worked very successfully in his career for probably 40 plus years. And then he said, I just like to get out of the house and talk to people. And hey, if I get paid for it, that's fine too. The goal is not to have to do that. That's what I told him. But it's great. If that's you, that's fine. There's a little bit of this presentation that talks about psychology, and that would be if you feel like you're in over your head. And I would expand this not just to the people in the room and those watching, but if you know someone who's in over their head. They are behind perhaps on their mortgage. Maybe they have credit card debt. Maybe they have just lots of things going on in their life that take away the focus from the finances, which I get. That happens to everybody. You, or if this is you or if this is someone you know that there is a path to being more successful, to getting back on track. And I call it the eating the elephant approach. We'll talk about it later. You eat the elephant one bite at a time. You do the little things right. You keep making good decisions one after the other, and they're gonna add up. That's tough to see when you're younger. That's really tough to see when you're in your 20s and you're saying, I've finally got a job that pays me something. I wanna go out and spend this money. I wanna go live. I get it. Everybody's like that. But if we can start building good habits now, you are gonna be so much happier with where you're at later in life. So don't live in fear. I told this story during the first presentation today. I work with a couple, recently married, in their 30s, and the husband they were able to get this paid off, tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt that needed to get settled. And credit card debt, we'll talk about what that actually does numbers-wise, but if you've ever had rolling over credit card debt that's lasted a while, it snowballs quickly. Interest rates are high. He needed to get it paid off very soon because of the interest rate was just killing him on a month-to-month basis. He actually went out and worked with a debt consolidation company. It was a law firm that went on his behalf to multiple credit card companies that he owed this money through, and they said, hey, we're going to work with him on a payment plan. We're going to get him on one payment rather than 8 different payments, and our goal is to have this all settled within the next couple years. Now, they were fortunate. They were both had good jobs. They were making good money, but they were way behind on this payment. So the worst thing you can do if you feel like your head is above or below the water, or someone you know's head is below the water, is put the head down and try not to think about it. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse if it's credit card debt or any kind of debt. You need to start dealing with it now, even if it feels like you're dealing with it on an insignificant level. You know, even if it's, well, I could afford to pay an extra $100 a month on this credit card payment. Do it. Do it. Get it paid off quick. And I keep going back to credit cards because that's one of the main culprits of debt, and especially onerous debt. But there are other things that can cause your head to feel like it's underwater too. Feeling like I'm never going to be able to stop working because I don't have enough saved. I didn't start early enough. I got really behind in my 30s and 40s. How do I catch up? You know, unfortunately, there's no magic bullet, but what I recommend to all young people, and it really doesn't matter how old you are to start this, when you start at a place that offers you benefits, especially a 401k, and I've been told the match here is 5%, do everything you can to get to that match cap. So in other words, if they're going to match 5% of your contribution or up to a cap, try to get to that full number. You might not be able to. That's okay. What I say to anybody is start with whatever you can afford to take out of your paycheck. I don't care if it's $10 a paycheck. I really don't. Start with whatever you can afford. Never stop. Never turn that number to 0 or make it go down. And only give yourself raises as time goes on. I was just working yesterday, 2 days ago, in my office with a guy who works for Disney World down in Florida. His brother was a client from up here, and he happened to be in town, and he said, every year, in the first of the year, I give myself a 1% raise on the amount I save into my 401k, whether I got a raise that year or not. That will add up to more money than you can imagine over a 30-plus year career. And even if you're not in the position to have a 30-plus year career, maybe you've joined either Grand Casino or you started work somewhere else where they didn't have a benefits plan, it's still a good practice. Yes, of course, time won't be on your side if you're older and just starting out, but it's still going to make a difference. So all of that is for what makes you happy. The end goal is not to just have the biggest bank account number. You don't get a prize at the end of your life for what your bank account reads. I tell people all the time, I'm the financial advisor who tells you to spend your money. You know, I was just talking with one of the people here in between the sessions, and I said, you know, there's 2 kinds of philosophies about living in retirement with money and how you should be spending it, whether you want to just hoard it through the whole period or you really want to be out there spending it when you want to go. And I said, some people are so concerned with their kids and leaving them a nest egg or leaving them a legacy that they don't think about themselves enough. This money is there for you. It's there to be spent. And personally, I'm more in the second camp, which is not, wow, legacy is incredibly important. It's not important. But I'm in the second camp, which is I call the they should be so lucky camp. For whatever's left for kids, whoever your beneficiaries are, my opinion is they should be so lucky. And everybody is at a different stage in life, and of course I'm generalizing a little bit here, but think about it that way. This is your money. This is what you worked for. Use it on the things you want to do. And I could give you great examples of the people that I work with and what they end up doing with their money. A nice quote here. There's no secrets. I don't have a magic bullet for you to just make your portfolio go up by $100,000 in the next year. I wish I did. If I did, I wouldn't be here. I would be doing it myself. But there's no secret about the fact that hard work and diligence, and dedication gets you most of the way there. So before you want to achieve a goal, and this is how I encourage you to think about this. So this is kind of real world stuff at this point. When you are making a goal, whether it's, I have a retirement date in mind right now. I would love to be done at 50. Maybe that's a real aspirational goal. A lot of people would say, well, 60 would be nice. I mean, if I didn't have to work till 65, that would be great. Whatever that day is, doesn't matter. Some people will say, I never want to stop working. That's what I love to do. That goal can be reached, but it can't be reached all at once. You can't go for the next 6 months and all of a sudden turn your situation from being able to retire at 65 to 60. That just doesn't happen, that sort of progress. But if you do it a step at a time, what would be the steps? So let's get concrete here for a second, because I've been very conceptual. What are the things you should be looking at if you want to retire earlier and do better with your money? You should look at how much you can save. And I am not a Excel spreadsheet budget keeper. That's just not my personality. I have met those people, they're great. They have a lot of data on themselves, that's fine. I have a sense of where my cash flow is every month. I know if I'm in the black or in the red. And that changes month to month too, depending on what's going on. I recommend everybody, even if you feel like you have a good handle on it, whatever account, whether it's your checking, savings, whatever, that your paycheck goes into, look at the balance on the first of the month and look at the balance on the last day of the month. Is it bigger or smaller? Did you add to that number or did you subtract from it? That will get you a very general look, but a pretty accurate one at where your finances are. Now, if you're adding to it, that's fantastic. We should be looking at putting some of that money possibly to work in your investments. So let me paint you a picture. Let's say, I have X amount of dollars the first day of the month and I have $100 more by the last day. You should really think about putting that extra 100 into your, not deferred comp, 401k. Because it's going to do better there for you. Now, maybe it was a light month and you say, well, I'd really like to see next month go through like that before I really believe that I'm that much in the green. Fine, that's great. Let it go another month, see what it goes. Build up your own personal savings too. I think the very next slide, it's 2 slides from now. Yeah, 3 to 6 months is a great rule of thumb for how much to have in an emergency fund. That's a lot easier said than done. 3 to 6 months of living expenses is a lot of money. I don't necessarily subscribe to it's got to be 3 to 6 months. I think it's different for everybody depending on what your expenses are. Are you renting? Do you have a mortgage? Do you own your house outright? That makes a big difference into how much you'd save. But if you don't have savings and you find yourself bringing in more money than you need in a month, add it to your savings first. Build up a little bit of a cushion for yourself. Don't worry about sticking every dollar into your 401k. That doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all. But if you're in the green or in the black, however you want to call it, think about saving more because that is going to add up more over time. If you are in the red, if you're spending more than what you're bringing in a given month, well, I mean, you're probably ahead of me. There's 2 easy ways to change that. You can either spend less or make more, which is a lot easier said than done. What I think at that point we should be thinking about is, what are the things that are most important to me? What are the things that if I was going to say, without this, and for some people, that's Kraft macaroni and cheese instead of Food Club. That's what makes life worth living. I'm not here to poo-poo that. That's what your situation is. But think about the things you absolutely need, and think about the things, okay, if I did this slightly different, I might be able to change the way my monthly budget works. And I'm, again, not a person who thinks you need to have an Excel spreadsheet of what your budget is, because I don't. But you do need to have a handle on where the cash flow is coming in, and that is what's going to tell you whether you're able to save more. Speaking of investments, I deal with investments all day long. If you've got questions on them, the market's going crazy right now, so you've probably noticed if you have accounts that they might not be looking so great lately. But if you are 5 years or more away from your retirement, you should probably be towards the more aggressive end of whatever your risk tolerance is. I can't speak for everybody. Some people are very conservative by nature. Some people are hyper aggressive by nature. Great, everybody's different. But if you have 5 years or more, you should probably consider, I'll say, being more aggressive. And maybe you're there already. But what I mean by that is, There are target date funds in a retirement account that have a certain year, like you pick the year you want to retire, and that's where it's managed to. Those, there's nothing wrong with those. They are kind of a one-size-fits-all answer, and nobody actually is a one-size-fits-all person. So you should take a look at what the other options are. If you don't feel comfortable being able to parse that yourself, there are people out there who can help. I'm not advertising myself. I'm just saying you should talk to someone who does. That could be a role model, by the way, going back to that piece of it. Somebody who's done well for themselves saying, hey, I actually just stuck with the target date and it really worked out well for me. No, there's nothing wrong with that. But consider what you're invested in, not down to the granular detail. I mean, that's something for somebody like me to do. But how aggressive are you? Because you need to be aggressive to get growth, is what I'm saying, essentially. It says, become a financial guru. I would again use the term role model rather than guru. But be someone or know someone who you can model your own behavior after. Wow, I really respected, so-and-so who was in my department who gave themselves a raise every January 1st on their savings. Or not only did they save into their retirement account, but they actually built up this other account with their spouse that now they're using as their trip money, their fun money. Or, hey, they just figured out how to make their lifestyle work at a very reasonable number that they can live on for the rest of their life. All those things are incredibly important, and you do that through, unfortunately, years and years of dedication and simple things going right. So let's talk a little bit about credit card debt specifically. I get the question a lot, when, and this could be true of any debt, what I'm about to say. Okay, I came into some money, maybe, or I've got $100 extra a month from my paycheck versus what my expenses are. Should I pay down my mortgage extra, or should I invest that money? And how do you make that decision? The way I would encourage you to think about it is, what is the biggest payoff for each dollar and what you would do with it? So let's use the example on the slide as our guide here. Credit card, on average, is going to be 18% interest. That's a pretty average number. 29 is a high number, but that can also be found out there. If you have $100 extra dollars and you could say, well, I have a credit card debt or I have my investments, you would have to make more than 18% in your investments to make it a better option for you to do that, to save, versus paying off that credit card. This is a long way of saying, pay off your credit cards first. They are most often your highest interest debt, and that means they're going to stack up the most quickly. So one of the things I talk about, I think it even talks about on a later slide, is how do you decide what debt to pay off first? Let's say you have multiple kinds of debt, a mortgage, credit card, what have you. Choose the one probably with the highest interest rate, because that is the one that's costing you the most right now. Let me use a different example that doesn't have anything to do with credit cards, your mortgage. Now, everybody here who has a mortgage probably has a different interest rate, but let's say, a couple years ago you could get one for 3%. But let's say your mortgage is at 5% interest. And let's say, you either look at it or you have somebody look at it and you determine, actually my 401k, I make an average of 6% a year. It's actually maybe better in the long run to just pay the normal payment on your mortgage, and if you've got a few extra bucks, save it, because you're coming out 1% ahead by doing that. I talk about this a lot, and I don't think it's necessarily intuitive, so I'll kind of reiterate it. If you can make more money and you always can, of course, returns are not certain, that's part of the problem with this, but if you feel like, I think it's reasonable that I might make more money in my investments than what I'm paying in interest on my mortgage, for example, you might be better off just continuing to pay your mortgage, not paying extra, and using the extra money in your investments. Long term, you probably come out ahead that way, and I can tell you firsthand, multiple people I've worked with, I've advised to do exactly that, because their interest rate on their mortgage is low enough. This is also a reason when interest rates are low, again, at some point, they've started to come up here. Go to a bank or credit union and ask them what they give you for a refinance. It's probably self-evident, but if you can get a lower interest rate, even if you still keep a long term out there, you might have more cash today to invest. And again, if your money makes 6% a year on average and you bring your interest rate from, let's say, 5 to 4%, now you're coming out 2% ahead every year by the money that you're saving. This doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm telling you, over years and decades, this is going to add up to a somewhat life-changing amount of money. I've seen it work like this. So you should always, always be thinking about, if I've got an extra dollar, what would be the best possible thing I could do with it? And I think the answer a lot of people usually think is, well, I should pay off my debt. But a lot of times, actually saving the dollar can be the best thing to do with it. So the debt snowball method, it's kind of a buzzy term. The snowball method is pick the thing with the highest interest rate and work on that first, because that's the thing that's costing you the most amount of money. Let's talk for just a second, because this goes back to a real world scenario I had, about 401k loans, or taking money out while you're still working. It is, in general, a no-no, in my opinion. There are reasons to do it. There are often not great reasons to do it. It usually ends up hurting you more than it helps, because what it does is it robs you of the time of that money being invested where it could have grown. Yes, you use it for some pressing need in the near term, but you don't have that compounding while that money's out of there. So one example where it could make sense for you or for someone you know, if you have a lot of credit card debt and that interest rate is 18%, even in a very good year, a 401k is probably not going to make you 18% return on your money. That may be a situation where it pays to take money out early of your 401k and pay off your credit card with it. This is actually what happened. I used the real world example of that young couple with credit card debt. He used money from his 401k to pay it off because ultimately it was going to be in his best interest to get it paid off sooner rather than later. It is a rare circumstance in which I would recommend this to someone. You really need to think through, and most of the time I encourage everybody to really think twice. If you have something come up, I get it. That money's sitting there and you're like, well, I do have this pot of money sitting over here. If you really can help it, don't touch it. I promise you'll be happier if you're able to not touch it. One of the things that leads to having to use the snowball method, what happens when the big unexpected expense comes up? What happens when healthcare, it costs you something and you don't have the money in your savings to pay for? Your car breaks down or gets totaled. The heater goes out in the middle of the winter, the furnace does. Where do you grab money from when you need it? A lot of people grab it from their credit cards. That is not a bad thing. I'm not here to put shame on credit cards. I use credit cards all the time. I do most of my monthly expenses on credit cards. I also just try to pay it off at the end of every month so I don't pay any interest. Because some people don't know this, by the way. If you put a balance on a credit card and you pay it off before the next bill, you don't pay any interest. So you're just using the credit card's money for free for a month, more or less. Maybe there's a fee on the card, but I won't get into all that. Anyway, one of the things that I've recommended that people do if a big expense comes your way, two things. First is, if it's for tens of thousands of dollars, go to your bank or credit union and just see what they'd give you. See what kind of terms they give you on a $20,000 loan or something like that. Maybe it's not going to be worth it, but at least you asked. That's at least something to consider. The other thing that I think people should know more about, there are many types of credit cards that will offer you 0% financing for a certain period of time. If you can get that and you really do believe, okay, it's 18 months at 0%, I can pay this back in 18 months. I know if I stick my head down and get work done and do it, I can do it. That's a way better option than just sticking it on your regular credit card, even if you have to open up a new one. I do recommend that for people who have these expenses kind of fall out of the sky on them. Look for something that'll give you really cheap financing, because if you pay zero interest, you're just getting to use their money for 18 months before you pay them all the way back. That's better than nothing. Well, let's look at my next slide here. I talked a little bit about this debt management program. This is if, again, I would term it if your head is below the water. And I don't just mean you're underwater on your mortgage, but you're suffocating. You feel like, I'm never going to get out from under this debt. I'm never going to be able to stop working. I'm never going to, be able to pay this off. What happens when I retire? I'm going to be on Social Security at most. If you're in that situation and it's because of debt, I do encourage people to think about talking with either a nonprofit group, because there are groups that won't even charge you anything and they'll give you kind of a consultation, or if you really do need to take some actionable steps, go to a firm that does this for real, because they do make it easier. And again, I hope we all knock on wood that this isn't us. Maybe it's someone we know, but it's an important resource to know that's out there. One of the best things they do is that top check mark there. One convenient monthly payment. If you have debt from a lot of different places, they can work with all those places and get you down to one payment. Now, it might not save you money, but at least it's one number to worry about. And they help you get the bigger chunks paid off over time. It is successful from what I've seen. So really something I would like to highlight there. I do want to talk a little bit about, as far as, and let me make sure how I'm doing on time here as well. Okay, so one of the questions I get asked is about credit cards versus debit cards. This is something that has become a lot more popular lately, and I think it's worth going through the differences because it can actually make a difference on your debt side of the equation as well as your financial security side of the equation. So for those who don't know, credit cards most often have almost no fees if your card gets stolen. If you've ever had a card used for a fraudulent charge, you go to the card company, you say, hey, this wasn't me. They'll say, great, we'll take it off your bill, we'll get you a new card, you're good to go. If you lose a debit card or your bank account information gets stolen, they can clean you out of whatever's in that account. And a debit card goes right into your checking account. So there are obviously ways that you can get some money back, but you have to go through the bank to do this, and there's a whole claims process. If you know anyone who's had to do this, I hope none of you have. But if you know someone, it's really a pain. It is not at all like the credit card situation. I am not here to say don't have a debit card. I do have a debit card. I use my debit card to get money out of an ATM when I need cash. But that is about all I use it for. Because if I'm doing something online or anywhere, I'm going to grab a credit card before that and just use the money I already have in the checking account to pay off my credit card at the end of the month. So there's not a reason not to have a debit card, but just be careful. If you're a debit card person, and when they first came out, there were a lot of debit card people where, hey, it comes right on my checking account. It's better than writing a check. That's great. Consider if there's a credit card that makes sense for you that you can just pay off at the end of each month. Because that's what I would do, and you can get a lot of rewards for credit cards. I'm not here to shill for a credit card. I mean, credit cards are good or bad, but they can offer advantages over debit cards, is what I would say. As far as, I'm kind of hitting the topics I wanted to cover from this morning as well. As far as, let's talk a little bit about investing. So not just about what a 401k is and why you should contribute to it. I would highly recommend all of you who have access to it contribute to your 401k. It has the highest contribution limit of anything you're going to have access to that has a pre-tax status to it. And maybe I should clarify that real quick too. 401k, money goes in not taxed, which means for years after that money is sitting in there, it has not yet been taxed, meaning you're getting compound growth on money that has not yet been taxed. That is huge when you apply decades to the process. So, and even if you don't have decades, it's still big. When you take the money out, it is taxed. It's taxed like income, not like gains. You're not just paying taxes on what you grew from what you put in. You're paying taxes on every dollar that came out. Important to know. 401ks are incredibly powerful tools. I recommend realistically, get as close to the max that you can do. Now, very few people can actually max out their 401k because it's, $20,000 a year almost. But if you can save more, save more. You're going to be happier that you did. Talking about the actual investments, I mentioned those target date funds. Let's talk a little bit about the market and what time in the market means versus timing the market. You might be looking at the stock market right now and saying, why would I have my money in the market when the market just goes down day after day? And we've had a really rocky ride here over the past couple weeks. First off, a couple things to know. The market goes up 7 out of every 10 years. It's not necessarily a 50-50 proposition. That is a real stat. Now, that's the stock market. You're going to be invested slightly different than the stock market, but I encourage people, and again, I said this a little bit earlier, if you've got a while till you retire, you're kind of in a win-win situation to an extent. Let me explain what I mean. Market goes up, your investment's going to go up. That's easy. That's a win. The market goes down, you are still contributing to your account, meaning you are buying in at a lower and lower price. However, markets do recover. They have recovered from every drop that has ever been, and I anticipate they will recover from this one as well, even though we're down from where we started the year. I know that's, maybe easier said than done, and I could give you a whole talk about where we're at with the market these days, but that would probably bore you to tears. But 2008, we recovered. 2020, we recovered before the end of the year. Going back to 2000, the dot-com, going back to the 80s, 70s, all the way back to the Great Depression, we've recovered from every drop we've ever had, big recession drop. That means sticking with your investments, investing in something that you feel like you can stick with is the most important determinant of success. Being invested, participating with the market, and not touching the money is the number one thing anybody can do right. We could argue about what the best investment is. I could, for everybody in this room, I could set you up with different accounts and have it invested differently, slightly, still aggressive, and you would all be in 3 different places. But if any of you ever got out and the other ones didn't, no matter what you were invested in within reason, the ones who stayed in would be better than the ones who got out. It is incredibly hard to time the market. And I know it's really tempting when you see your account going down and you're saying, shouldn't I just make some of this more safe? Or why would I put my $100 a paycheck in if it's just going to go down to $90 by the time the week ends? It's about the long view. And I can tell you this, not someone who has retired before, but who helps people retire every day. The ones who are happiest are the ones who let it ride, who stick with what they've got and say, hey, this is a long-term thing. Now, if you're within a year or two of retirement, yeah, it makes sense to look at how risky you are, and people generally get less risky when they retire. So totally, we got to take risk into account. But especially if you're younger or you've got years left to go before you retire, I encourage you to consider being still pretty aggressive with your funds. Again, with what that looks like for you. Everybody's going to be different. Aggressive for one person might be conservative for another. That's totally valid. But I do think you're going to be most rewarded for sticking with it, continuing to contribute, don't stop contributing, and being somewhat aggressive. I do think that's going to pay off for you over the long run, whatever, again, aggressive means to you. So if I was going to, kind of put a bow on this, and there'll be time for questions, and if not, you'll get some time back in your day. But if I was going to put a bow on this, there are 5 things, well, there's more than 5 things, but there are 5 main things everybody should do to our thesis. Take control of your finances, but also avoid those mistakes. So the first thing is continue to contribute. Don't stop contributing. Only give yourself raises on your 401k or whatever's available to you. If you've got a family member who works for a school district, it's a 403b. They work for a government organization, it's a 457. Mostly similar to a 401k. There's a few differences, but mostly similar. Don't stop contributing. Start as soon as you can. And for you guys in here, be the person, be the role model, this is number 2, for the younger people who work for Grand Casino and say, have you gotten started with your 401k yet? You need to get started with it. I know it's not a fun conversation to have when I'm taking money out of your pocket as a 20-year-old and saying you should put it in your savings account. They are going to thank you later. I'm telling you, I've had this experience where people have walked into my office and said, so-and-so in my department 30 years ago took me down to benefits and made me sign up for my 401k. And I couldn't thank him enough today. If you need that advice, then you should do it. And if you can give that to someone else, even better. So second piece, besides the 401k, be a role model. Number 3, debt. Pay down the biggest interest rate first. And as a corollary, know that you don't have to eliminate all your debt immediately, especially if it's a low interest rate. If it's a low interest rate, it might be in your interest to pay back sooner. I've had a lot of people who have some cash maybe sitting around saying, should I pay more on my mortgage? I could actually afford to pay the rest of this off. I only got a few years left. And I said, well, you could. There's nothing wrong with paying off debt. But you'd be doing a huge favor to the bank right now because, as you may have heard, inflation is a bit of a problem right now. Things are getting more expensive. The bank is losing money on all of you who have mortgages right now because inflation is so high. You're paying them back with money that's worth less than what they gave you in the first place. So I'm not saying that's a reason not to pay off your debt, but I'm saying that might be a reason to keep the debt around for a little while if you think about how that adds in with the rest of your finances. So number 3, pay down your highest interest rate first and consider not paying off early some of your debt. Just pay normal. I'm not saying, don't make payments on your debt. You got to do that. But I'm also not saying, by the way, because I've had people ask me this before, don't go and take out a loan just to invest in the market. That's usually not a winning proposition in my case, in my belief. Number 4, if you are or you know someone in a position, this goes back to what's on the screen right here, where their head is below the water and they don't know what the first move to make is. They don't know what any move to make is. Get some help. That might, by the way, be a therapist. And I'm not that person, so I can't tell you when that's appropriate or not. But I've had people that I've worked with who've really just been helped by that. They didn't need to change anything financial. They just needed to change the psychology. But if it is financial and you're saying, I just don't know where to start, get in touch with a pro. That could be a financial advisor. That could be a debt consolidation firm. Your mileage is going to vary based on what you need. And the last thing that I would say to kind of wrap up here is, well, it goes back to the first thing I said. Don't make the big mistakes. Do the little things right one step at a time. Give yourself a raise in your 401k. Okay, I did something. Let's look over here now. Okay, I realize I don't need to go out to eat every night because I just don't need that. Maybe I can cut my spending a little bit by that and make my budget more reasonable in a given month. Maybe I just need to find out what my budget is, by the way, what my monthly cash flow is. Do those little things step by step. Don't put pressure on yourself to do it all at once. I've had so many people walk into my office and want to fix it all in an hour. It doesn't get fixed in an hour. It gets fixed over years of doing the little things right. So stick with your 401k, stick with your debt payments, but consider not paying off extra, consider saving more. And over time, you're going to be really happy with where things end up with you. So I won't take up any more of your time on the presentation here. I think I did okay for time. Questions? Anybody? And I will also give my contact information out. So if you have one that's personal to you, you can ask it privately.
What about like Roth stuff? Say you do match your 401k. I'm 57.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, can you repeat? Sorry, for the people who are listening.
So if you do max out your 401k, and then we also have a Roth that we can put in here.
Yep.
Is there more you can do besides those two?
Yes. So probably at that point, if you're at the max for both, the first place I'm going to look is just a taxable investment account. And I say taxable because it's not an IRA or a Roth. Now, you know what an IRA and a Roth is. I'll say it for everybody on the call. IRA, money goes in pre-tax, or 401k, comes out taxable. Roth is the other side of the coin. Money goes in, already taxed. Money comes out, including gains, not taxable at all. So a taxable account has neither of those two benefits. Everything that goes in will never get taxed again because it's all taxable dollars that you've put in. It's all after-tax dollars. But any gains you make are taxed at capital gains rates, which are usually less than income. So it can even be more tax efficient than your IRA or 401k. Any dividends and interest you make throughout the year get taxed in the year you earn them. That's the tax part of it. Why I would look for that if you're already at your max. No contribution limits. You can invest as much as you want. When you hear about somebody with like a brokerage account or a joint account or something like that that maybe has, and you don't have to even invest in stocks. It could be in something conservative or something that's more diversified than just a few stocks. There's no limits on it, and you're only ever going to pay taxes on the gains, so it's not like you're really hurting yourself tax-wise now or in the future. It's all after-tax money, so it's not going to be able to come out of your paycheck like your work stuff is. That's one downside. But it's in your name from the very beginning, and unlike an IRA or Roth IRA, you don't have to be, if it's a work plan, you don't have to be separated from service to be able to access it. You put it in 1 year or 1 day, you can take it out the next day. So you can almost, I wouldn't use it like a savings account per se, but you can use it for money that you might need relatively soon. Hey, I've got a few extra dollars lying around. I've got a project I want to do in the next year, but hey, let me see what I can make conservatively in the next year or 20 years from now. That's what I would look at in your position, or that's what I would consider. I don't want to tell you what to do. That's not what I'm here for. That's my day job. But that would be the first thing I would consider. Does that make sense? Yep. Other things you could consider just really quickly, you could consider whether there's a long-term care need potentially. So that would be nursing home, assisted living, in-home healthcare. It's cheaper to get that insurance when you're younger. It is somewhat expensive, so that's what stops a lot of people from doing it. That would be another thing to consider, as well as life insurance, just to give you kind of the full gamut of everything I would analyze in that position. Again, the first one is probably the one I'd lean the heaviest towards. Any other questions or anything? All right. Well, I was gonna for the folks in Hinckley, Kim in my office is going to be collecting questions if there's been some in the chat, and I will be getting a question and answer document out so everybody can look at it. We had more questions in the audience in person in the first one, and I don't think there were any from Hinckley, but maybe there are this time. So if anybody has any others or would like to talk to me one-on-one, more than happy to do that. My contact info, I'll give it to Tasha. Devana has it. You can reach out to them to get it to me or come up to me afterward, and we'll talk. So I really appreciate everybody for being here, both in Mille Lacs and in Hinckley. It was great to be able to do this, and I appreciate being hosted as well. Thank you, Tasha, and everybody else for helping set this up. So with that, everybody, you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.